You say, hey, when there's a problem, you call a man. The Democrats can't even tell you what a man is.
So when you hear Walz brag about how much of a man he is, what does that tell you?
I think there might be a little bit of a cope there, you could say. There's a little bit, he has to remind us how masculine he is, trying to not even be able to load a shotgun or
bring in her, and they bring in this other guy who's radical from Minnesota. That's the vice president, who he believes a lot of wild things. One of them is transgender surgery for people who are under 13. Another one is abortion up until 9 months.
Ooh.
Yeah. He changed the Minnesota state flag to make it look like the Somali flag. That stuff scares the
It wasn't a debate, it was a demolition when Joe Rogan and Charlie Kirk turned their attention to Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. They didn't just critique his policies, they ripped through his entire political identity like a tornado through a paper house. Walz's team might have expected a political discussion, but what they got was a surgical takedown powered by raw facts, brutal humor, and a complete disregard for talking points. One man came with the hammer of common sense, the other with the chisel of relentless logic. Walz came armed with bumper sticker slogans, but Rogan and Kirk brought hammers. By the time they were done, all that remained was the deafening silence that follows the collapse of a carefully constructed narrative. The takedown was so complete, so thorough, that it left no room for interpretation. This wasn't just a difference of opinion, it was an exposure of what they saw as a fundamental fraud at the heart of modern politics. They turned his political track record into a cautionary tale, live and in real time for millions to witness.
I think it would be very similar to Barack Obama throwing a baseball. I don't think it would be a sight that would be easy on the eyes. It's right, I could throw quite a tight spiral. Hey, Governor Walz, let's go have a game of catch. We'll see how you do.
It's just weird and how avoidable it was.
100% avoidable, but pathological liars, people that are habitual liars, they just lie all the time about everything.
The first crack in the governor's armor wasn't about policy, it was about his persona, a strange and desperate projection of masculinity that felt completely hollow. Charlie Kirk zeroed in on this immediately, pointing out a bizarre pattern. The more Walz tried to project an image of rugged manliness, the more he seemed to be compensating for something. He would boast about how he could kick any Trump supporter's AU, or how he was a man who knew how to fix a truck. But Rogan and Kirk just laughed it off as a transparent and pathetic cope. The lady doth protest too much, Kirk quipped, perfectly capturing the sentiment. Rogan joined in, challenging the claim directly. I bet you don't. I bet if I bring a broken truck to you and a bag of tools, you're lost. They painted a picture of a leader so deeply insecure that he had to constantly remind everyone how much of a man he was, even while fumbling to load a shotgun on camera in a now infamous video. This wasn't just a cheap shot, it was a foundational critique. If the man's core identity was a performance, what else was fake? Kirk twisted the knife by defining what he saw as true masculinity in today's world, standing up for women who can't stand up for themselves, fighting to protect female privacy in locker rooms, and ensuring women's sports remain for women. He contrasted that with Walz appearing on Gavin Newsom's podcast to attack him, highlighting a leader more concerned with scoring political points than protecting vulnerable people. The image was set. Walz was playing the part of a tough guy while real men were fighting actual battles.
Have cognitive decline problems at his age, but at her age, she's just dumb.
Yeah,
Biden
I think I was saying that
I need a vice president dumber than me.
Great.
Kamala Harris may be the dumbest person ever elected vice president in American history.
It's so perfect.
Kamala saying, I need a vice president dumber than me, and it's Walz. Men have tampons.
We have a lot of accomplishments. We haven't taken adequate credit for it, frankly. We got to do a better job of getting the word out about what we have accomplished and who did it.
You got to lose, because we got to break this cycle.
We were getting scary close to people justifying totalitarian measures.
I think we need to push back on this.
Tim Walz in the campaign trail was literally saying free speech doesn't include hate speech and misinformation.
There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
Hey man, you, because everything that we called misinformation just a few years ago, it's on the front page of the New York Times now.
But a fragile ego was just the beginning. The real alarm bell started ringing when Walz took aim at a fundamental American right, revealing a mindset that chilled his critics to the bone. On the campaign trail, he was recorded making a chilling declaration. Free speech doesn't include hate speech and misinformation. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy. For Rogan and Kirk, this wasn't just a political political gaffe. It was the quiet justification for totalitarian measures. It was the voice of an establishment that believes it has the right to silence dissent. Rogan, a fierce defender of open dialogue, immediately shot back, pointing out the glaring hypocrisy. Everything the establishment branded as misinformation just a few years ago, he argued, is now being grudgingly admitted as fact on the front page of the New York Times. Walz's statement revealed a mindset obsessed with absolute control, a world where the government anoints itself the sole arbiter of truth. This isn't just about being wrong, it's about creating a system where being right against the official narrative is a punishable offense. They saw in his words the dangerous seed of an ideology that seeks to regulate not just actions, but thoughts and words, all under the benevolent guise of protecting our democracy.
Say that you have one rule for Facebook and you have a different rule for Twitter. There has to be a responsibility that is placed on these social media sites to understand their power.
The New York Times just printed a thing. Turns out we were lied to.
They are directly speaking to millions and millions of people without any level of oversight or regulation. And that has to stop.
Yeah, you lied to us.
The most masculine thing that someone can do in America today is stand up for women that are not able to stand up for themselves.
Right.
So while Tim Walz is going on Gavin Newsom's podcast, attacking me, by the way, saying that I'm a bad guy, well, I'm sorry, Governor Walz. One thing that we don't have in common is, unlike you in Minnesota, I, every single day, am actually fighting for female privacy in locker rooms and that women's sports will not have men in them. Real men stand up for women when they're not able to.
This authoritarian desire for control wasn't just theoretical, it became a terrifying and absurd reality during the pandemic. Rogan, who spent countless hours on his podcast dissecting the flawed and often contradictory logic of lockdowns, tore into Walz's performance with surgical precision. Minnesota, under Walz's leadership, became a bizarre landscape of nonsensical rules. You could pack into a massive corporate-owned big box store without issue, but your local family-owned gym or neighborhood barbershop was deemed a lethal biohazard zone and forced to shut down. Rogan mocked Walz's heavy-handed approach, comparing him to a bunker-bound weatherman calling hurricanes from his basement, completely insulated and detached from the real-world consequences of his fear-driven rulebook. He clung to his emergency powers like a toddler who's found the TV remote, refusing to let go. There was no flexibility, no nuance, just a blunt, one-size-fits-all playbook that made no room for common sense or human dignity. It was a period defined by the governor's bizarre fixation with control, where the lives and livelihoods of real people were treated as acceptable collateral damage in a political drama series where he auditioned for the lead role of emergency manager. The more absurd the decrees got, the more Walz doubled down, and the more Rogan grinned as he highlighted every boneheaded decision.
Did you say you could fight any Trump supporter?
Yeah, he says he kicked their ass, and they're scared of him because he could fix a truck. Like they're threatened by his masculinity. I know how to fix a truck. That's what he said. Like, do you? I bet you don't.
The lady doth protest too much.
I bet you don't.
I fear.
I bet if I bring a broken truck to you and a bag of tools, you're. This video of Tim Walz doing the exact same thing.
Right.
Exact same thing, and he said, of course, it's a Nazi salute. He said that.
Right.
We spent 3 days debating, having them trying to debate that President Musk gave a Nazi salute. Of course he did. But that is a distraction.
This is how crazy things have gotten. Like,
it's coordinated.
But perhaps the most damning indictment of Walz's leadership came when his state was literally on fire. During the George Floyd riots that convulsed Minneapolis, Charlie Kirk argued that Minnesota was left with a gaping leadership vacuum. Rather than lead with strength and conviction, Walz hesitated. Rather than stand up for law and order, he stepped back. Kirk described the catastrophic failure with a dry, withering disdain, comparing Walz to a substitute teacher who showed up with a guitar and a dream instead of a plan. The metaphor was perfect. Walz offered platitudes about unity while the city burned, acting as if his presence alone was a solution. Kirk argued that this indecision wasn't just a sign of weakness, it was actively dangerous. It created a void that was quickly filled by chaos, destruction, and anarchy. He portrayed Walz as a man refusing to use the fire extinguisher in his hand because he was still busy checking the instruction manual. His decision-making during that crisis, Kirk contended, was a masterclass in failed leadership, turning Minneapolis into a laboratory for progressive experiments gone horribly, predictably wrong. All the while, Walz gave speeches about coming together, a stark and insulting contrast to the reality of a city being torn apart under his watch.
He was 100% right with Tim Walz.
I know I'm doing something right when the Fox News crowd is all pitching at me like crazy. Like, I'm loving it.
That guy was almost the vice president of the United States.
Elon Musk was crying last week. Tim is being mean to me, basically, you know, like, yeah.
I'm sure you've seen that thing where it shows Obama saying, I need a vice. That Tim Walz cocksucker, if that guy got into power, like if Kamala died and Tim Walz, Tampon Tim, was our fucking president, you know how crazy this country would be? That weirdo who puts tampons in the boys' room, and what about our joy? Like he's a complete pathological liar. Like a complete liar. Lied about being in Tiananmen Square, lied about being a fucking...
While the cities burned, the state's economy began to smolder, choked by what Kirk described as an actively hostile administration. He painted a grim picture of a governor who seemed to view businesses not as the lifeblood of a functioning society, but as the problem. As other states were fighting to reopen and rebuild, Walz was busy issuing press statements about equity and climate justice, noble-sounding goals that did nothing to help the small business community that was desperately trying to keep the lights on. Kirk called this hollow approach leadership by press release, a style where the only thing that ever seemed to grow was the size of government spending and the level of public confusion. He argued that under Walz, Minnesota became a test site for how quickly you can scare investment out of a state. The message sent by the governor's office, whether intentional or not, was clear and chilling. In Walz's Minnesota, ideological purity and progressive talking points mattered more than the survival of the very people who signed the paychecks and build the communities. It was an economic vision rooted in theory, completely detached from the devastating reality it created on the ground.
When they decided that J.D. Vance was weird. Yeah. Remember that one?
And then there's just weirds everywhere.
Weird. Oh, you don't want a weird guy. Meanwhile, you have Tim Walz is your VP. Weird. You don't think that guy's weird? He's weird in every way. Yeah. The way he walks, the way he waves his hands.
Yeah, he reminds me of the clown emoji.
He's a bizarre guy.
He's a strange dude.
I just don't understand why they made that choice.
Yeah, it gives the creeps.
I just don't understand why they made that choice. There's a lot of other people that are qualified. I don't know why. I read that Kamala Harris made that decision when she...
The progressive experiments didn't stop at the economy. They seeped into the classrooms, poisoning the minds of the next generation. Kirk brought the receipts, highlighting the disastrous and undeniable drop in Minnesota's standardized reading and math scores under Walz's watch. For any normal administration, this would trigger a 5-alarm fire, a call for an all-hands-on-deck approach to fix the fundamentals of education. But not in Walz's Minnesota. Instead of addressing the academic crisis, his administration responded by hiring more diversity officers and rolling out more ideological training modules. Kirk framed the absurdity of it perfectly. Instead of helping kids learn to read, they were being taught how to journal about their privilege. Schools, once bastions of knowledge and critical thinking, were being transformed into centers for social activism. Under Walz, it seemed you could learn everything except the basics. The only thing that was multiplying, Kirk joked grimly, was the bureaucracy. It was a perfect encapsulation of his governing philosophy. When faced with a real-world failure, ignore it and double down on the abstract theory that caused it in the first place. Beneath the thick layers of policy failures and ideological crusades, Rogan and Kirk uncovered something they found even more disturbing: the character of the man himself. They didn't just disagree with his politics, they questioned his integrity. They flat out labeled him a complete pathological liar, citing as prime evidence his famously debunked claim of having been present at China's Tiananmen Square massacre. It was a lie so audacious, so easily disproven, that it suggested a deep and troubling disconnect from reality. They described him as weird and a strange dude, a man who walks and talks like a clown emoji. They found his presence unsettling, so much so that they couldn't fathom how he was ever seriously considered for the national stage. Then came the most shocking and memorable claims, the ones that solidified his image in their narrative. They brought up the controversy over him changing the Minnesota state flag to one that, in their view, looked disturbingly like a Somali flag. And most notoriously, they branded him Tampon Tim, a reference to his administration's policies that allegedly led to tampons being placed in boys' restrooms. It was a brutal, unforgettable moniker that crystallized their entire argument. Here was a leader not just incompetent or misguided, united, but deeply strange and profoundly disconnected from the common sense and values of the people he was supposed to represent. This wasn't just a Minnesota problem anymore. The duo made it terrifyingly clear that Walz had national ambitions, a fact that elevated their critique from a local roast to a national warning. They pointed to his friendly podcast appearance with California Governor Gavin Newsom, another politician they viewed with deep suspicion. But the most chilling revelation was that Walz was reportedly Kamala Harris's personal choice for vice president. The line that followed was absolutely devastating, a moment of pure comedic brutality from Charlie Kirk. He imagined the thought process. Kayla saying, "I need a vice president dumber than me." It's Walz. The implication was staggering. The man they had just spent an hour methodically dismantling, the pathological liar, the clown emoji, Tampon Tim, was almost a heartbeat away from the presidency. It framed Walz not as an isolated failure, but as the perfect representative of a political class that is incompetent, out of touch, and actively hostile to the values of millions of Americans. Their takedown was no longer just about one governor. It was about stopping a national political trajectory they saw as disastrous. To cap it all off, they drilled down on what they saw as his most profound character flaw, his complete and utter inability to take responsibility for anything. Charlie Kirk declared that the man seemed to have a degree in blame deflection. Every time something went wrong on his watch, it was always someone else's fault. It was the federal government, it was local officials, it was climate change, it was Mercury in retrograde. It was anyone and anything but him. Kirk offered a hilarious and cutting analogy. If Governor Walz tripped over his own shoelaces, he would immediately blame the entire shoe industry and call for a statewide review of walking practices. Accountability, a word he surely used in his speeches, was just a sound he made when the cameras were rolling. It meant nothing. Rogan hammered this point home by highlighting the profound disconnect between Walz and the people he governs. There was no empathy, no genuine awareness, no understanding of what working class Minnesotans actually face day to day. His entire worldview was filtered through a protective bubble of advisors, headlines, and trending topics on social media. Rogan compared it to someone trying to run a farm based on Yelp reviews. Everything looks clean and orderly from a distance, but on the inside, it's total chaos and the cows are missing.